Good evening, everyone. So we'll start this evening. Welcome to Path of Awakening Buddhist Center, the course on the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chögyam Trungpa. Let's start with a bow to bow in and welcome everyone. So we are up to chapters 37 and 38 of the Profound Treasury. These talks were digested from 15 years of seminary transcripts. These are every year Trungpa Rinpoche, Chögyam Trungpa, took anywhere from about 125 to upwards of 300 students, depending on the year, away in retreat for 3 months. And during that time, he delivered teachings, and there was a lot of practice, a lot of sitting. There were whole periods of a week or 10 days when people did nothing but sit, and then they would come back and there would be classes. Every evening he would lecture during the study periods, as well as some of his senior students would give courses. And it was a very rich time. And his talks were digested into these 3 volumes of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma. And we are working our way through volume 1. The Tibetan Buddhist teachings are roughly organized into 3 levels. These are called yanas. Yana means vehicle. The first, an introductory or foundational level, is called the Hinayana. Hine actually means lesser vehicle, but Trungpa Rinpoche preferred to call it the foundational vehicle, and that's what we are studying right now. The second yana, which we will get to in a few months, a couple of months, somewhat, is the Mahayana, the greater vehicle. And then the third one, which we will get to at some point in the future, is the Vajrayana, the adamantine or indestructible vehicle. It's also called the Tantrayana and the Mantrayana. All of these are synonyms for the same body of teachings. Mantra, of course, is usually taken to mean a verbal formulation that you repeat as an object of meditation. The word literally means mind protection, mantra. And Tantra, which people associate with all kinds of things. When I first came to Boulder, 50 years ago, and it's still there, is a housing development that had been built called Tantra Estates, because the developer, I suppose, figured that people would assume that they were going to have wild, licentious parties if they lived in Tantra Estates. And it's still there, like Tantra Estates. Tantra is associated with that, but actually the word means continuity. And what it refers to is the continuity of reality and the continuity of consciousness, which never stops. So these 3 vehicles, the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, organize the teachings. Now, the teachings in Buddhism, there is no holy writ. There is no equivalent of the Bible or the Quran. Rather, enlightened people give teachings, and they have done over the centuries. And all of these teachings are valid and appeal to different people at different times and places. The Buddha himself, who lived in around the 6th to 5th century BC, his teachings were meant to be, just as all the Buddhist teachings are, useful ways to take things, useful to particular people at particular times and places. And he often said conflicting things because they were useful to the people to whom he was speaking. Now, the teachings, so the teachings have evolved. Initially, they were collected and codified into 3 main divisions, and this is all relevant for tonight. The 3 main divisions are called the 3 baskets, the Tripitika in Sanskrit. Tri means 3, Pitika means basket. And the three baskets are the Sutra Pitika, the Vinaya Pitika, and the Abhidharma Pitika. The Sutra Pitika is the collection of the Buddha's speeches, often in dialogue with his students. So sutra literally means dialogue. And these are collections of his teachings that he gave in conversation, in dialogue with his own students at the time. The Vinaya Pitika is the collection of rules of conduct that developed over time for both monks, nuns, and lay people. And these were developed not arbitrarily, but through experience, that it was useful to have this particular kind of rule because it helped a person on the path and made them into a better, more fit and suitable human being. So that's what the Vinaya Pitika is. It's collections of these rules of conduct. So for instance, if you were to go to a week or a month-long meditation program in my particular tradition, every day we would take the 5 basic vows for lay people. And those vows are not to kill, not to steal, not to have improper sexual relationships, whatever that means, changing target, not to lie, and finally, not to consume alcoholic beverages, because what they say is that if you consume alcoholic beverages, then you'll commit the other 4 sins too. You break the other 4 rules. Now, every day when in this meditation program, we renew the vow. And if you think that you are going to break that vow during the day, you simply don't take it. And then you're not bound to that vow for that 24-hour period. If you do take it and you break it, then you're supposed to confess to your meditation teacher, who really doesn't want to hear it, but you do it anyhow. And so these are the collection of rules for monks and nuns are in the hundreds. Things like how to wear your robe, what kind of food to eat, when you eat it, all kinds of things. The final basket of the Tripitaka is the one that we're concerned with tonight. It's called the Abhidharma Pitika. And what it is the early Buddhist teachings about the psychology of confusion and enlightenment, and of reality. It's the description of how reality actually works and how mind works together with that. The Abhidharma is vast and it's quite beautiful. It's been codified in a number of ways. And what happened was that, again, as after the Buddha died, after he passed into nirvana, as they say, his students began to disagree about what he had said. Now, there wasn't any writing and certainly no recording devices. So it was really up to people's memory to memorize and to remember what he had taught. And there was a lot of disagreement. And as a result of those disagreements, the Sangha, that is the community of practitioners who were left after his death, fractured. And it split into different schools who had different ideas about what he had said. This was immediately after his death, and it went on for several centuries. It's called the period of the 18 schools. Most of those schools no longer exist, but there are several which do. One of the schools, which was called the school of those who adhere to the doctrine of the elders. It's called the elders is the word in Sanskrit is Sthavira. This school went south in India and eventually made its way to the adherents of this school to Ceylon. And from Ceylon, it spread throughout Southeast Asia. In Ceylon, Sthavira was translated into Pali, which is Tera. So the doctrine of the elders became the Theravada. And that's what permeates a lot of Southeast Asia, including Burma, Cambodia, Laos, Indonesia, and it's to some extent in Vietnam, although Vietnam got its Buddhism primarily from China, And that's the second thing that happened. In addition to the Sthaviras, there was a school that developed in India after the Buddha's death called the Mahasangikas, the greater Sangikas, the greater Sanghas. And that school developed a whole new set of doctrines having to do with the Bodhisattva and Shunyata. That school emigrated out of India to China about the time of Christ, and to other countries, Mongolia, and from China to Japan, Korea. And there is some other schools as well. There's another school called the Doctrine of Everything Exists, that means Sarvastivada. And this is another Hinayana school. And this school was carried north into Tibet, and it became the foundation of the Tibetan Hinayana, that first introductory foundational vehicle. And that's what the Sarvastivada school went north. And that's really what we're going to be dealing with tonight. Now, the key component of the Abhidharma, you might say the hallmark of the Abhidharma, is that it describes reality in a very particular way. What it says is that we think that all kinds of things exist, cars and people and trees and so forth. But actually, these are events which take place to our consciousness only in the present moment. Right now, you're aware of this voice, you're aware of this image on the screen, you're aware of your own body sitting in the chair in the present moment. And these apprehensions, these things that we perceive, are actually, what we're doing is we're taking a lot of different things and conglomerating them and putting them under names. So for instance, you would say, this here is John, right? But actually what you're looking at is some pink skin, a bald head, some glasses, a black sweater, all kinds of things which are conglomerated together and then subsumed under the word John. Likewise, the classic example for this is a cart. Supposing you have a little cart, and we call it a cart, but a cart is actually a collection of parts: wheels, axle, the bed of the cart, the sides of the cart, the handle with which you pull the cart, but we subsume it all under the word cart. The most powerful and deceiving example of this is the word I, because we assume that there is such a thing as I. But what these teachings say, the Abhidharma teachings say, is that what I actually is a collection of many, many parts. And they're all subsumed under this name I. And these parts only are experienced momentarily, in the moment. The parts are called dharmas. And what a dharma is like an atom. You might think of it as an atom. And there are fundamentally two kinds of dharmas: material, physical, that make up the material world, and mental, thoughts, emotions, all kinds of mental events. All dharmas only occur in the present moment, instantaneously, and then they're gone. They arise and they pass. And they have three moments, according to these teachings: the arising, the enduring, and the passing, and then they're gone. It happens so fast in the moment, your experience of these dharmas, that the analogy for the speed with which dharmas arise and pass is if you were to stack 60 petals of a flower in a stack and then drive a pin through them. The amount of time it takes for the pin to pierce one petal, one of those 60, is the amount of time a dharma endures. Its beginning, its birth, its endurance, and its death. And these dharmas are things like the experience of black, the experience of this sound, the experience of the thoughts that you may be having at this moment. This is called the Dharma Theory. And a famous Buddhologist who is long past, Herbert Gunther, called these dharmas atoms of experience. They arise and pass away so quickly, and they're continually flexing. And we live in the midst of this presentation of dharmas. Why is this important? It's important because we get lost in the names. John, George, Kurt, Irene. We think that these are actual entities, when in fact what they are is a constant presentation of all these dharmas that come up, which is constantly being born and dying. And the biggest myth is the belief in I, me, I. Because what I is a collection of mental and physical dharmas that are constantly being born and dying, and has no true existence. This is the discovery of the Hinayana stage of the path. And it frees one from constantly trying to protect this I that we think is so important, constantly trying to build up this I that we think is so important. We are enslaved to the endurance of this myth of I. And we are constantly looking for ways to make I bigger, better, stronger, more solid, happier, when in fact, it's just a name. And if we come present in our meditation and experience this world as the constant arising and passing of the dharmas, we, number one, experience it much more accurately. And number two, we are freed from the slavery to I. Now, I want to share, I have shared with you two documents. The first I'm going to put up on screen, I hope. Here we go. Yes. These are the 75 dharmas, elements of existence, these little atoms of experience that arise and pass away in the moment, of the Sarvastivada school. Each school had its own list of dharmas. And some of them, like the Yogacara school, had 100 dharmas, but the Sarvastivada school had 75. And you can see that they're divided into roughly 3 groups. These are forms, rupani, sente, and these are actual physical dharmas. The eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body. And the objects, the sense objects, the form that the eye sees, the sound that the ear hears, the smell that the nose smells, the taste that the tongue tastes, and the touch that the physical body feels. These are the physical dharmas. And then there's a ringer in here that I've never bothered to understand. It's called an element with no manifestation. Avijñapti rupa. Rupa means form, and avijñapti means it's not conscious. So why they threw that in there, who knows? But they did. And so there's actually 11 dharmas, different dharmas, that relate to the world of forms. And then there is the second one, which is mind itself, which is purely the perceiving quality of mind, called chitta. That's the 12th dharma. And then we have the third category, which is the concomitant mental faculties, chaitasika. These are things like feeling, conception, will or volition, touch, contact. That's the feeling of when you touch something, there's a mental quality of the contact. Wish, chanda, intellect, all these things, mindfulness, which is smriti, and so forth. And then we get the good functions of mind, which are faith, energy, equanimity, self-respect. Shame is regarded as a good quality. Decorum, non-greediness, non-ill will, so forth. And then we have the general functions of klesha. Klesha are defilements of mind. These are bad qualities. Ignorance, which is called, this is different than avidya, for those of you who know that term. This is moha, means sort of stupidity, dullness. Idleness, indolence, non-belief in the Dharma. Low-mindedness, And then the general functions of evil, lack of respect, lack of decorum. And then the minor functions of defilement, anger, parsimony, which is stinginess, jealousy, affliction, so forth, deceit, arrogance. And then there are mental events that are indeterminate, neither good nor bad, repentance, drowsiness, reflection, investigation, so forth. And elements that are neither substantial nor mental functions. And these are things like they just came up with names for them because they felt that these are experiences that one has and need to be categorized: acquisition, non-acquisition, life, birth, decay, and so forth. And finally, they have these three non-created elements. They just wanted to create a category. These are neither mental nor physical. Space, akash, and then extinction through intellectual power. And nirodha means that you are extinguishing the desires, and extinction due to lack of a productive cause. And these are, they had to have names to cover, they were trying to cover everything. There's a fellow who died a few years ago named Steve Goodman. And he was a scholar, PhD from somewhere, and lovely guy, and a Buddhist. And he was an expert at the Abhidharma. And he would organize classes where people would get together and they would create their own Abhidharma, their own list of what are the fundamental elements of reality: mental, physical, neither mental nor physical, and so forth. Now, the purpose of this is that if you meditate and you begin to see everything as it arises and passes in the moment, you are seeing these dharmas, these elements, and it dissolves the belief in I. Because instead of believing in I, see, when you were thinking about I, we're lost in a dream, this story. It's like a TV drama that we constantly live out in our own minds. And it's a drama of acquisition, challenge, hope and fear. Will the hero, I, win out, or will I suffer a defeat and loss? And we live these stories. But when you begin to come back into the present, observing these elements of experience as they arise and pass away in the moment, that story is cut, I dissolves. And this is the main achievement of this early Hinayana stage of the path: the accomplishment, the understanding of the egolessness of self, that the self actually does not exist. There is a key term that you need to understand. It's svabhava in Sanskrit. And sva means own, and bhava, B-H-A-V-A, means being. We think that I has svabhava, has its own being. But what this theory of the Dharma theory is saying is it doesn't. Only the dharmas, these elements, these 75 elements, have svabhava. Only they have any kind of true existence, and it's utterly momentary, in the moment. Whether it's physical or mental, it's a flash in the moment. Gunther called them atoms of experience that come and go and live only for as long as it takes a pin to go through the petal of a flower. So the main achievement of the first stage, the Hinayana stage of the path, is this discovery that what we thought of was an I is just a collection of parts, a collection of atoms, and that it has no true existence. And in discovering that, we begin to live in a very different way. We begin to live in the present moment much more than we have in the past. So I'm just muting because we're getting some noise somewhere. Yeah. Now, there are a number of ways that these dharmas are organized to explain different aspects of life, of our experience. One of the ways is the one that we dealt with in the reading, called the 8 consciousnesses. And these are the consciousness which is aware of visual events, forms, visual forms, the consciousness which is basically, let me go back up. The way they schematize this, there is a mind for each organ. It's really just different aspects of mind. But you could think of it that the eye mind sees through the eye and sees the object of vision, the table, the chair, the person. The mind of the ears hears through the ear, the organ of the ear, and perceives the object of hearing, a sound, and so forth. So we've got the sense organs, the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body. And in addition, there's a 6th organ. I've talked about this in meditation practice, which is the mind itself, and it perceives mental events. So of the 8 consciousnesses, 5 of them are sensual, having to do with the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, and the body. The 6th is mental, it's just the mind itself. And the main function of that one, the 6th one, is very interesting. It is the coordinator. In other words, it not only sees thoughts, but it sees all the other sensual apprehensions as well. So that as you look at your screen, you can coordinate the vision that you're seeing on the screen, the image, which might be me, with the words that are coming out of this mouth, as well as the sensation, now that I mention it, of your bottom on the chair, all of this, and if there's any odors in the room, and you can coordinate it all together. And that is the main function of the 6th consciousness. It's kind of a coordinator. It coordinates the other 5. These are actually, they talk about these as though they're separate entities, these consciousnesses, these 6. The consciousnesses of the 5 senses, and the 6th one being mind. But actually, they're just different aspects of our mental life, of what it means to be conscious and aware. Now, then there are 2 more. I want to talk about the 8th first. The 8th consciousness is called the alaya, vijnana. The alaya means storehouse, or the ground, and vijnana means consciousness. So it is the best word to describe this is that it's what Freud called the unconscious. It is where all your memories are stored. You're not remembering your mother until I say that word, and suddenly an image of mother or a memory of mother pops to mind. But that memory is stored back there in your, call it your unconsciousness, your unconscious, call it the alaya. That's what Buddhists call it, the alaya. And these memories are stored there, and they're called seeds, bijas is the Sanskrit for them. And they perfume the alaya. The word for that is vasana. So you've got all these experiences that are stored in your alaya. And so, for instance, if you've had some traumatic experiences that you suffered as a child, perhaps, they are back there, and you're not thinking about them at this precise moment until I mention them. But as I mention them, they come conscious. Those bijas, those seeds ripen, and they come present. This is the action of karma. Karma is the ripening of your memories So for instance, the example that I've made up years ago and always give is a mother is walking down the street with her child. And say she's got a toddler, like this one here, and with Viv. And she is busy looking in the windows of the store, and the child sees a dog and goes up to the dog, curious. The dog is a bad dog, a mean dog, and the dog bites the child. Traumatic event. The mother rushes in, the owner of the dog rushes in, they console the child's crying. That memory of that trauma is stored in the child's unconscious, in their alaya. Months go by. The child isn't thinking about the dog, the child is thinking about life in general, but that memory is back there in embryo, you might say, in potential. And then one day, the child and the mother are walking down a street again, and the mother is absorbed once again in looking in the window. Hold on a second. Actually, I'm going to bring up the list of these, I hope, dharmas. These 8 consciousnesses. Yeah, here we go. Just a little hard to find. Yeah. Here are the 8 consciousnesses. Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, the mind itself, mano vijnana, and then we're talking now about the alaya. So their mother is walking down the street with a child again. And once again, she's absorbed in shopping, and she doesn't notice that the child has seen another dog. This is months later, and in the nearer distance. And the child is frightened to death. The memory of that past trauma comes up, and the child is thinking, a dog, it's going to bite me. The mother sees what's happening. She approaches the owner of the dog, finds out that the dog is friendly, brokers a meeting between the child and the dog is a friendly dog. It licks the child's face, it wags its tail, it's sweet, and the child learns that not all dogs bite, that some dogs are friendly. That memory is now stored in the unconscious. And if the child were to meet a dog a third time, which it will, its memory will be conditioned by those 2 previous, its behavior will be conditioned by those 2 previous memories. This is the main function of the alaya. It constantly stores these memories. One way that they come out is, as I've described, in the daytime, when you're conscious and you experience something that triggers a memory, like the dog did for the child. Another way is at night. When you lose your body, you are completely in your alaya. And the alaya is spinning out, churning out things from the past in all kinds of random, nonsensical ways sometimes. And these are your dreams. And you have dreams that change very rapidly because they're purely mental. And they're being kicked out by the alaya. Now, finally, we come to the 7th, or defiled mental consciousness here. This is the Krishnamana vijnana. Vijnana means consciousness. And mano refers to mind, and klishto means defiled. And the main function of this consciousness, and remember, these don't actually exist as separate entities. They're just aspects of how mind works. Its main job has a number of jobs, but its one job is that it looks back at the alaya and it says, aha, there's me back there. So you have this vague sense of me-ness that is the product of all of your memories that have been stored in your unconscious. And those memories have perfumed your eighth consciousness, your alaya, your unconscious. So if you've had a lot of trauma in your life, this will determine the way in which you behave now in the present. Whereas if you haven't, you'll behave in a different way. All kinds of things back there. And the seventh consciousness looks at that and says, that's me. So the seventh consciousness conceives of I. I is that vague sense of being that we have, that then takes shape in the other six consciousnesses, in sensual, sensory experiences, and in mental experiences, where we say, I'm thinking about, I'm feeling this table, I'm looking at my computer screen. So that's what the seventh does. It constantly sees all of this and appropriates it under the word I. These are the eight consciousnesses. And this is what's described in this chapter. The reason that we study these is that when you come completely present in your meditation practice, and you're just here, watching everything as it arises, sights, sounds, smells, mental events of all kinds, physical sensations. All of this deconstructs the I. And instead, we become much more accurate, much more on the point, here, now. And this is really one of the first and most important aspects of meditation practice. Now, in addition, in this chapter, he talked about some other things. You see, what the early Buddhists did is they rearranged these dharmas, 75 of them, to explain different aspects of our being. One aspect is, how do we make this huge mistake of believing in an I? Well, the I is actually, what we call an I, is actually 5 heaps. That's what skandha means. Here, the 5 skandhas. And we've gone through this in an earlier chapter. The first of these heaps is form. It's this physical form. And it's made up of those 11 dharmas, of the eye and its object, the ear and its object, and so forth, and including this ringer, avijñapti rupa, which makes 11 instead of 10. And then there's feeling, which is the second skandha. It's 1 dharma. Concept, which is the 3rd skandha. Samskara, accumulations, which are all the other mental events, except for 1, which is the 5th skandha, vijñāna, consciousness itself. And these, we're not going to go into this today. We've done it before and we'll do it again. But these are the explanation for how I is constructed. In the moment, suddenly, there is an apprehension, a perception of something out there. That is the birth of form. It separates out. Instead of this field of awareness, we've got a figure and a ground. We're now aware of John, let's say, and the background behind me fades into relative unimportance. And that perception implies the existence of a perceiver, I, here. This is the way the form skandha works. So first there's a perception of a figure against the ground of this space that we're in. And suddenly it's become frozen. And it implies a perceiver here. And things go on from there. We've discussed this before. I'm not going to do it tonight. And it elaborates into the fully blown 5 skandhas, which are the full manifestation of the belief, the false belief in an I. I once asked Trungpa Rinpoche, I said, well, don't you sort of need I in order to be able to negotiate the world, pay your rent and drive your car? And he looked at me and he bellowed, ego is a lie. The whole thing is a pernicious error. We've also discussed the 12 nidanas. This is the explanation for how karma arises and passes, like that little story I just told you about the mother and the child. This is a more detailed explanation, and we're not going to go into that tonight. Then in the chapter as well, he talked about these two categories, the 12 ayatanas and the 18 dhatus. And they are simply explanations of how cognition takes place. So we have the eye and its visual object, the ear and its sound, the nose and its smell, tongue and its taste, the body and touch, and mind and mental events. These are the 12 ayatanas, the 6 pairs of knowables. When you add in the consciousness that looks through the eye and sees the visual object, then you get the 18 dhatus, they're called. The eyes, the visual object, and the consciousness, or the mind, as it were, that is able to see through the eye and say, aha, there's Kurt Steger, there's Judith Journow, there's my computer, whatever it might be. Now, there are two main reasons that we're even talking about these tonight. And he talked about part of this in the second chapter that you read, Mixing Mind and Space. The first reason I've already pretty much gone into. He says that the main idea is to experience the space in which all of these things arise. You see that because they're arising and passing away so rapidly, they're just part of the space. They are manifestations of the space. They express the space. When you see an object in space, you can focus just on the object and ignore the space. But if you are aware of the figure against the ground, then you're aware of its transience, how it passes. You are not caught up in stories about it, like that's my enemy or that's my friend. That's something I want to pull towards me. That's something I want to get out of my life. All of that disappears. And instead, there's pure awareness. And you can make decisions about your world, but you're not caught up in dream. You're living in the world of the constant and presentation and arising and passing away of reality. The second reason for being aware of these is that, see, the Hinayanists, they were kind of atomists, the people who dreamt all this up, coming from the Buddha, supposedly, but it was really the period of the 18 schools. They were atomists in that they felt that the world was composed of these atoms of experience and that these things actually had true existence. What does it mean to have true existence? It's called svabhava, own being, as I've said. And what there are three main characteristics of svabhava. One is that for however short, the thing that has svabhava endures over time. It has a past, a present, and a future. It is born, it endures, and it dies. And that's what was said about these dharmas. The second quality is that it's independent. You can take the wheel of a cart and you can move it around and it's still a wheel because it is independent. And the third thing, what is the third thing? Independence, is that it's unitary. That each one of these dharmas is only one thing. It has no parts. Now, what happened is, and that this is the way that they deconstructed belief in an I, because when we say I, we think that it's one thing that exists over time, right? And I was born and I'm going to die. I. Me and my possessions, me and my life, me and my lovers, me and my haters, all of that. And what they're saying is, this I that we think of is just a collection of parts that are coming and going. And it is so useful to deconstruct I. And that the main accomplishment of this stage of the path is becoming free from belief in I and coming much more present into the present moment. And secondarily, that when you become free of the belief in I, You no longer have to defend it. You no longer have to practice self-aggrandizement to try and build it up. And so you begin to cease to do harm to others. These are the two main qualities that are achieved at the Hinayana stage of the path. Freedom from I, which is a tremendous freedom from suffering. We're free from that constant feeling that we have to maintain this self because we're dwelling in the present moment, simply aware of everything as it arises and passes. And we cease to do harm because we're no longer putting this ahead of everything else. This I. Now, I'm jumping ahead a little bit just to tell you that one of the reasons we want to know about these things, the 12 nidanas, the 18 dhatus, and the 5 skandhas, and those things in particular, is because when we get to the Mahayana stage of the path and the doctrine of emptiness, of shunyata, this is a denial that even the dharmas exist. They say that even that there is no such thing as svabhava, that nothing endures over time for even the shortest interval. Nothing has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Because as soon as something appears, it's already passing. Like these words, like this gesture. You can't find the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's an illusion. It's a constant presentation which has no substance. And that there is no svabhava. And that is the essence of the doctrine of emptiness, of shunyata, which is the hallmark, one of the main hallmarks, of the Mahayana, the second stage of the path. And so, for instance, if you chant the Heart Sutra, which we have done on occasion, which is the quintessential statement of the Mahayana stage of the path, it was the sort of boiled down version of what's called the Prajnaparamita literature. Prajnaparamita means the transcendent virtue of wisdom, the wisdom that sees that there is no svabhava, that there is no essence, that everything is empty of own being, empty of svabhava, empty of, and it's shunya, which means empty. And that this shunya has actually two qualities. There's an emptiness to it, empty of svabhava, and there's a fullness, because in this emptiness, everything is so vivid as it arises and passes without anything being there, anything of substance. The Buddha supposedly gave this teaching on Vulture Peak Mountain in an area called Rajagriha, the king's domain, which is north of what is now called Bodh Gaya, or Gaya. And you can go there, you can walk up the mountain, supposedly mountain, it's a bump. But there's a road going up, and you can go up to the top, and there's a platform up there, and where the Buddha gave his teaching to his monks. And they were all Hinayanists, some of them. Well, some of them were Hinayanists, and some of them were Mahayanists. They had already gotten this teaching. And so this teaching is inspired by the Buddha, the Heart Sutra. It's actually a conversation between two of his students. One is a pure Hinayanist named Shariputra, who believes in the Dharma Theory. And the other is a bodhisattva who has already understood emptiness, shunyata, and his name is Avalokiteshvara. And Shariputra is inspired by the Buddha's presence to ask Avalokiteshvara to explain the Mahayana, to explain the transcendent virtue of wisdom. And Avalokiteshvara says to Shariputra, "O Shariputra," and he starts with the 5 skandhas. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is no other than form. Form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, perception, that's concept, accumulation and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas, here it is, the dharmas, are emptiness. They have no characteristics. See, they're not blue, they're not form, they're not the feeling of contact, they're not a thought like confidence or hatred. They have no characteristics, the dharmas. They don't actually exist. They have no svabhava. They're illusions. He says, so there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness. There go the 5 skandhas. This is the Heart Sutra, the quintessential statement of the Mahayana. He says, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas. And there go the 12 ayatanas down here, these sense organs and their sense objects. And then he destroys the 18 dhatus. And then he says, there is no birth and no cessation. I'm losing the track of that here. There is no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path. There go the Four Noble Truths. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Avalokiteshvara says to Shariputra. This is the statement of Prajnaparamita. So it helps you to understand what he's denying and why. That nothing has any true appearance, any true existence. Everything is a constant presentation, a passing away, one with space. You can't separate out this glass from the space around it. It's just a constant sort of, it's just like on a computer screen. The pixels are changing, giving you different images. But the things that they present are just changing images. And that's what we're living in the middle of. And that's the doctrine of emptiness, of shunyata. So this is a lot. You've just gotten a quick, fast introduction to Abhidharma. There are people who spend their lives studying this, like Steve Goodman. And there are books written on the Abhidharma, big ones. The most famous one was written somewhere, I guess it may be about the 3rd or 4th century in the Christian era by a great, no, it must have been a little later than that, 4th or 5th, by a great Buddhist named Vasubandhu. And it's called the Abhidharma Kosha, the treasury of Abhidharma, and its legend. And people study this forever. So I'm hoping that this made some kind of sense, this introduction to the Abhidharma and to these categories, the 5 skandhas, all of which are refuted or denied in the Mahayana, in the Prajnaparamita literature. No form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, tongue. It's really almost hilarious the way they go through it. And for your amusement, it's said, I don't know if you want to say amusement, that when the Avalokiteshvara gave this teaching to Shariputra at Vulture Peak Mountain, and at the end, the Buddha said, he didn't say anything all through it. It was all Avalokiteshvara talking to Shariputra in response to his question. And at the end, the Buddha simply says, good, good, O son of noble family. Thus it is, O son of noble family. Thus it is, just as you have taught. And all the Tathagatas, that means the Buddhas who have gone beyond, all the Tathagatas will rejoice. And it's said that at that moment, a lot of his early students, arhats, Hinayanists, who believed in the Dharma theory, had heart attacks. That's the myth. And so he realized, because they had heart attacks, that the world wasn't quite ready yet, many people, for this teaching. And supposedly, he hid it. It's a terma, a hidden teaching. And he gave it to the serpent deities, the Prajnaparamita literature, who live in the water, deep in the water. And it stayed there from then on until about the 2nd century Christian era, when a great Buddhist named Nagarjuna went down into the water and retrieved these teachings, supposedly. You're getting the myth and the lore here. So I think I've probably given you a lot here, and we'll stop for the moment and we have a discussion.
John, I just had a, I guess, a way of understanding where
Is this
I'm at.
Christy? Christy, are you speaking?
Yes, that is her. I didn't realize my video was off. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Yes, so I guess I've heard, I just wanted to ask about shunyata, or shunya, sorry. Shunyata is the same. That's the same way. Is shunya and shunyata the same term?
No, shunya is an adjective. It means empty. And
okay.
ta is a nominative. It turns it into a noun. So you pronounce it shunyata with the emphasis on the last syllable if you're going to treat it as a noun. Shunya means empty, though.
Shunyata. So this sort of idea of like, emptiness. And I guess I wondered about the way that I feel like kind of makes sense in my mind. I've heard Thich Nhat Hanh, and maybe it was the Dalai Lama, just talk about so emptiness being like empty of a separate self. So that this idea of because emptiness, I guess when I think of it as emptiness of anything separate, empty of a separate self, that kind of interbeing, I guess, idea.
Yeah, that's a good one. Interbeing.
So that it's just it all doesn't exist because it's all so interconnected that you can't tease out anything. So I don't know if that I don't know if that's like a modern or contemporary kind of tweak to those earlier teachings on emptiness, but that has helped me to kind of get my head around.
Actually, I hate to tell you, it's been done centuries before. There are a number of arguments that lead you into the doctrine of emptiness, of shunyata. And we'll be going through them in the Mahayana when we get to them, why shunyata is true. And the idea that things actually have true existence is not true, And one of them is that everything arises in utter interdependence on everything else. And that you can't draw a line between where one thing begins and another and ends and another begins. It's a constant interpenetration. And if everything arises in interdependence on everything else, you and me, this conversation, the air around us, the seats beneath us, the floor, the walls, if everything arises in interdependence, nothing has any independence. Everything is just part of a matrix of interdependence. That's one of the arguments for shunyata. There are others, but you alluded to that one.
Thank you. So that's like dependent arising, that term you hear sometimes.
Exactly, dependent co-arising, and it's pratitya samutpada in Sanskrit.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Fantastic.
We're getting very, very, it's very heady, this topic.
It is. Try not to think. Thinking. Yeah. Thanks.
So, who else? Let's see. I'm looking. Somebody. Oh, there you go, Robert.
Thank you, John. When did you say Nagarjuna retrieved Nagarjuna? When did you say he retrieved these things? What was the century? Or...
Well, that's a little difficult to say. The thing about Nagarjuna is that there are different versions of his life, including one that, he had a normal lifespan, and another version, he lived 900 years. So he lived probably in the 1st to 2nd century Christian era. Okay, maybe somewhere around 150 AD, CE. And in the other version of his life, he lived 900 years, and in the different versions, he lived a normal lifespan. That's the question you wanted to ask when he lived. He founded, he retrieved the Prajnaparamita literature basically what he did was he rationalized the Prajnaparamita literature. The Prajnaparamita literature is vast. The Heart Sutra in one page, which is the Prajnaparamita in one page, is a very condensed version of it. You have the Prajnaparamita in, let's see, the earliest version Western scholars say is called the Asta Sahasrika, which is the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 verses. And then there's the Prajnaparamita, I've got it on my shelf, in 25,000 verses. And there's even one in 100,000 verses. And there's even the Prajnaparamita in one letter, the letter A from the Sanskrit alphabet. Yeah. And then there's the Prajnaparamita in one page. Now, what he did was he took these ideas that are contained in the Prajnaparamita and he philosophized them, he rationalized them, he developed arguments to explain why there is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, why svabhava doesn't exist. And he created a school that is terribly important, in which you will study at some point, especially if you get into Tantra, because Tantra is based in many, many parts on this school. It's called the Middle Way School, Madhyamaka in Sanskrit. Yeah. The Madhyamaka school is legend. And the Madhyamaka school is full of arguments about why there is no such thing as svabhava and everything that constellates around svabhava. So when you believe in svabhava, for instance, you believe in cause and effect. If you believe that things exist, then you believe in their interaction, which is causal. And there are causes and there are effects. Here's a quick argument from the Madhyamaka, why cause and effect doesn't work. This is from Nagarjuna. He'll say, the arguments, and believe in Tibet, they would enact these arguments with two people, and one would be the Tirtaka, meaning the heretic, and the other would be the Buddhist, and there were gestures and stances that you took when you enacted these arguments. So the Tirtaka asserts there is such a thing as cause and effect. So then the Buddhist says, well, if you hold that there is such a thing as cause and effect, then you must agree that the cause can only come either before, simultaneous with, or after the effect in time. Those are the three possibilities. Will you agree? And the Tirtaka says, agreed. And he says, if you feel that the cause comes at the same time as the effect, that's absurd. How could you tell which is which? Tirtaka has to agree. He says, if you feel that the cause came before the effect and had no connection with it whatsoever, then how could it produce the effect? The Tirtaka agrees. And what's contained in that argument is the Tirtaka might say, well, part of it came before and part of it came simultaneously with the effect. But then you're back in the same argument. The part that came simultaneously with the effect, how could you tell which is which, cause or effect? And the part that came before, how could you say it produced the effect? Because it came before. And finally, if your cause came after the effect, that's ridiculous. How could it produce the effect if it came after it? So this is a Nagarjunian argument for why cause and effect don't work. He's got them for everything, existence, qualities, lots of them. There's a whole book called the Mula Madhyamaka Karikas, which means the root verses on the middle way. And these are in verse form. And you can read it. And there are endless books that scholars and Buddhists have written about it. Nagarjuna is sometimes called the second Buddha. He was terribly important.
Why I asked that question is because in the Bible, there are missing years, 18 years is unaccounted of in the Bible of Jesus. And it's very close in this time where this information was drawn out that the world was not ready for before. And it's like, almost like to me, it occurs like there was a ripeness for a meeting of minds, so to speak, for this type of thing.
Right. Yeah, the same idea illuminates the Buddhist teachings very, very, very much. That's the whole thing of Dharma. You know, the hidden teachings that are discovered, that were planted centuries before by teachers who knew that they were not, the people of his or her time were not ready for these teachings, but that they would be discovered in the future, hundreds and hundreds of years hence, and and the world would be ready for them then. Yeah, very much that idea. I
think Philip had a question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for your teaching in general, and particularly tonight. It was a wonderful synthesis. So my question, I've got a mess of questions, but the one I want to ask you right now is there one exception to this idea of non-existence? So you hear here and there throughout the Buddhist teachings, like recently, His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, there is no beginning of consciousness and there is no end to it. So is consciousness itself the one exception to this idea of no existence?
No, because the idea, you have to remember that the definition of existence is svabhava, own being, and that there are these three qualities of existence. One is that it endures over time and has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Consciousness does not. Consciousness has no beginning, middle, or end. You can't find it, like space. And that it is one thing, it is unitary. Point to where consciousness is, you can't find it. And that it is independent of anything else. Consciousness is there all the time. So consciousness and space, they don't deny this at all. They're often used interchangeably, consciousness and space.
Right. So they do exist. I guess the way I should phrase the question is to ask, are they the only things that do exist?
Well, you're using the term existence. And what existence implies a polarity, existence and non-existence. Some things exist, other things don't exist. You know, jackalopes don't exist, right? They have a jackalope up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, a statue of one. It's a rabbit with, a horn coming out of its head. And other things do it. So as long as you're dealing with the issue of existence and non-existence, that is what these teachings are addressing, because we live in a world where we worry about our existence and where everything around us has its existence, and non-existence. And we don't want our car to rust away and fall apart. We want it to stay alive and running. And our mates and the people we love and so forth. And what it's saying is all of that existence, non-existence, is a myth. That what we're living in is this constant display, ever changing, and it's not only empty. When you get beyond the first blush of shunyata, which is all about things not having any true existence, just this constant display. The second aspect of shunyata is fullness, that in emptiness, everything is revealed very, very beautifully, vividly, powerfully. And the world, they talk about it as being luminous. Luminosity is a very important word. It comes in really in the Tantras more than in Mahayana. That this world of being empty of existence is utterly, utterly luminous. And that one is overwhelmed by the luminosity. It's called Ursel in Tibetan, Prabhasvara in Sanskrit. And they talk about the union of emptiness, shunyata, and Prabhasvara, that the two are completely together. And that when we live in a world of things, it dulls us out. We become insensitive to the extraordinary beauty and meaningfulness of this world as it presents itself in the moment. That's what Tantra is all about. That was a great question. Thank you. Okay, Barry, help me out here. Come on, complaints. This stuff is, I mean, the Abhidharma is so neck up, you know, it's really very philosophical. Steve.
Yes, when we're meditating and we see thoughts and we label them thinking, is it helpful to acknowledge the element aspect that this is this thought is pursuing grandiosity or seeing? Is it helpful to acknowledge what kind of thought it is?
There are exercises in that, and these are done mostly in the Theravada tradition. Trungpa Rinpoche never taught it to us, but there are exercises of doing meditation where you identify your experience in terms of the Abhidharma categories of all the dharmas, you know, as they arise. And if it's in the first blush, it could be very mechanical and sort of hyper intellectual. If it leads one to a greater sensitivity beyond the categorization, but a greater sensitivity to the way things arise in the present moment and pass, you know, in our experience, then your meditation can become very, very free of the intentionality of I. You can become absorbed in the awareness of this present moment, and you become free of that I-ness and its purposefulness. Giving up the purpose in favor of awareness is a great thing to do. Because that's really giving up ego. Ego is all about purpose, purposefulness.
Okay. Then how does that differentiate from contemplation? And
contemplation is a different exercise.
Okay.
Contemplation is an intellectual exercise, conceptual.
Right.
And you might just do it. It's very much secondary to meditation, you know.
Right.
But it's helpful, you know, to contemplate different aspects of one's life, death, kindness, compassion, love, aggression, whatever you want to contemplate, to bring them more conscious. The whole idea is to get more conscious. Conceptual contemplation, you know, the way in which you do contemplation as a religious practice is that you start out by meditating, just awareness. And then you bring the object of contemplation up and you think about it. And then you dissolve the object of contemplation back into your meditation.
Right.
That's the way it's when it's led or when one does it as a formal practice.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's great. Helpful to people. I'm worried that I've overwhelmed everybody with all these categories. Robert, let's just see if there's somebody else first before we come back to you. Anybody? Okay. Robert.
Daniela had her hand up.
Oh, good.
Oh, thank you. Hi, I was kind of confused about cause and effect because I know you're talking about the Mahayana as well, but so in the Hinayana, the cause and effect I was thinking was karma. And so if the Mahayana says there is no cause and effect, then there is no karma. That's what I was just confused about, the cause and effect aspect of it.
Yeah. We have to distinguish between descriptions of confusion, samsara, ignorance, on the one hand, and descriptions of awakening, truth, enlightenment on the other. The doctrine of shunyata says there is no such thing as karma. Karma only lives in confusion. So at the Hinayana stage of the path, we're still confused beings. But when you begin to realize, this is the theory, that when one begins to realize the truth of egolessness, that I don't exist. See, that's what they call, there's the twofold egolessness. The first fold, as it were, is that I don't exist. The second fold is that other does not exist either. I and other. So at the Hinayana stage of the path, one discovers the non-existence of the I, the ego, but one still believes in the existence of glasses, sounds, objects, other people. At the Mahayana stage of the path, that dissolves. Now, causality, karma, lives in the belief in I and other. And that when one begins to pierce that twofold veil, they call it the twofold veil, the belief in I and other. It's also called the veil. The two veils are the veil of primitive beliefs about reality. That's the first veil. And that's the belief in I and other. And then what attends to that is that when you believe in I and other, you're caught up in all kinds of emotions: hatred, lust, jealousy, pride. And they all have to do with I and other. That's the second veil. And that dissolves when you learn about discover that other doesn't exist either. And so and the short answer to this question is causality only lives in confusion. Once one understands pure shunyata, which is the twofold veil is rent, I and other, there is causality is out the window. And karma is out the window.
We'll just take it like layer by layer. Our brains will just take in and process the information as it's supposed to at this time. It's supposed to.
So. What karma is the stories that we tell about ourselves, that control our future actions. So you experience some kind of a trauma as a child, and then you, like that story about the infant, right, who was bitten by the dog, and then reacts negatively when it sees a second dog, even though that second dog turns out to be friendly. But the child is projecting the I other situation that it remembers from the past into the present. That's how we are enslaved to karma. That is an example of how that child is living out its karma when it reacts negatively to that second dog. And we are constantly doing that all the time because we believe in I and other. When you enter the world of shunyata, the veil of I and other is rent. Okay.
Oh, someone has their hand up. Go ahead.
It could be me. Yes.
Shinyi.
Yes. Yeah. My question is, I guess, we can discuss about egolessness of Dharma, I guess, in two aspects. Like we can do a logical breakdown like the Madhyamika school, but I feel that there's also an experiential level of shunyata experience. And I feel that just understanding it logically or intellectually doesn't really help one understand it or feel it experientially. So I wonder, how does one make the breakthrough to get to experience that experientially? Is it through meditation or, I don't know, helping others in a Mahayana practice or something else?
Thank you. That's a terrific question. There are a number of factors. First, study does help. It's called developing the view. if you have no idea about emptiness, shunyata, it's harder to come to it in your meditation practice. It's like you have this view, the view of the future, the view of the way things really are. It's only intellectual, but it leads you in a direction. The second thing is, yes, it is experienced through meditation practice. And what meditation here isn't just the sitting, the formal practice of sitting on a cushion and watching your breath. Meditation really means coming present in your life. The best way to do it is you walk down the street. When you come completely present, ego is gone. There's no room for it, because ego is this constant thing of, what am I doing? Am I paying my rent? Does this person like me? Do I like them? And there's this constant monologue, dialogue going on in your brain. And when you come present, completely present, that's gone. There's no room for it. That said, there's a third aspect, which is the rending, you might say, of confused mind. And that can happen in a number of ways. One way is that some people just experience an opening. Some people read a book and their mind opens to the experience of emptiness. I mean, it's a harder way to go. One of the main ways, especially, well, in all the traditions, is in the interaction between the student and the teacher. The teacher can point it out, as it were, to the student, or can make something happen in the interaction between them, that the student's mind is opened. And there are many, many stories of this in the tradition. In the Zen tradition, they call it satori. In the Tibetan tradition, it's called pointing out instruction, or the meeting of the minds of teacher and student. So it always, though, there are people who have these experiences all by themselves. They just, one thing, their mind just opens and they're suddenly stunned. I know people who've come to the path because they had the experience naturally. But the problem with it is, even when you have it with a teacher, is that there's that moment of perception. And then there's because it's so discontinuous with the experience that you had that's gone before, the way in which one has seen the world up to that point. There's a strong contrast between the way one has been living one's life, seeing the world on the one hand, and this perception that one might have walking down a stair or in an interaction with a teacher. And that contrast makes the student value the experience. And they say, I just had an experience of shunyata. And in the instant that you do that, you're looking at it in the rearview mirror. It's gone. You're looking at it as though it was something that happened in the past. And the student has to make an accommodation, has to come, make a relationship with that situation where they're not trying to recreate something that they remember. That way lies a lot of suffering, can be. And the way in which you do it, you make it happen again in a legitimate way, is by sitting meditation. It's the only way, because it's, oh, are we getting late? Oh my gosh. It's the giving up of entertainment, of ego aggrandizement, of ego entertaining. When you sit, when you meditate, and if you can do it walking down the street, even better. But sitting is sort of a fail-safe because there's no entertainment involved.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We should end, folks. It's 7 o'clock here. It's 9 o'clock for a lot of you. Let's see. Any announcements? I don't think so. If anybody's interested in taking refuge, I've got a few people. Let me know. Send me an email or send it to Path of Awakening Buddhist Center at gmail.com. And I'll put a list together and we'll have a refuge ceremony, a small one, for people who would like to do that. Can't think of anything else. So we should close by dedicating the merit. See if I can pull it up on screen. Here it is. Okay, here we go. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
I don't even think I have to explain. Okay. Here we go. Hi, Kurt.
See you tomorrow morning.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, John.
George. Roberta, hi. Nice to see you.